Hello, hello, and welcome to Where Do We Start, a podcast where we explore the stars, the self, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amber Mitchell, and we are rapidly approaching the end of 2024. So I kind of always like to do this end of the calendar year reflection when it comes, and I have to say, 2024 has been an interesting year to say the least, and there have been a lot of lessons learned, some the easy way, some the not so easy way, and I think that there are a lot of them that are worth sharing. So I thought it would be fun to do 24 things that I learned in 2024. And I am an astrologer, so some, but not all of these will be based on or tied into the astrological transits of the year. So starting off the list, and this is in no particular order, but the first thing that I thought of that I feel has kind of been a major theme for me this year is discipline. And it's been a theme for me for the past few years because I've been doing a lot of reparenting and realizing that discipline is just one of the things that I wasn't really taught. And so I have definitely been able to reframe the way that I look at discipline this year and learning that it's not just about doing the things you don't want to do, right? That it actually has a lot more to do with keeping promises to yourself and being consistent, as well as thinking of your future self, right? And understanding that sometimes you have to sacrifice the comfort of right now for the change that you want to see in the future. Of course, it has not been easy for me this year. I think it's been easier because it's something I started working on last year, but it definitely has not been easy to stay disciplined. And I think last year I was really focused on being spiritually disciplined. And I think having that basis of spiritual discipline to be focused more on the physical discipline this year made things so much easier. Number two is to work smarter, not harder. And I know this is cliche, and I feel like it's something that I'm constantly reminding myself of. I literally have a bulletin board in my office, and it has a phrase on there that says work smarter, not harder. But I think really, and kind of tying in with discipline, understanding that the type of person I am and what really works for me is that I don't have to do difficult things in order to feel like I've accomplished something. I think I often feel like if it's too easy, then I feel like I kind of don't deserve the end result, or like I cheated somehow because I did it the easy way. And so getting out of that mindset this year has been key for me to understand that, hey, you're putting in a lot of work already. It's okay to do things the easy way sometimes. It's okay to make it easier for yourself. You're not cheating by making it easier. And of course, maintaining your, moral standpoint and having integrity in the things that you do. But yeah, I think for me, I've always kind of felt like, well, if I did this like so easily, then something about it just felt like I cheated or I took a shortcut. And getting out of that mindset and being able to, that's really what I've kind of learned about working smarter, not harder this year. The third thing that was a huge lesson, I think, for all of us in one way or another is not to idolize people, especially people who you don't know. And I think this lesson definitely came in the form of Pluto in Aquarius. So Pluto in Aquarius was a big transit this year. It happened in the beginning of January and then again in November. And Pluto's in Aquarius for good now. Pluto is a planet that represents power. It represents collective power. And Aquarius represents the collective itself, the individual, kind of like the common people. And so it being in the sign of Aquarius, meaning it's opposite the sign of Leo, which Leo has to do with fame and like kings and queens, people who we put high up on a pedestal and have that sort of authority and influence. And so with Pluto being opposite that sign, a lot of people in those positions of power with a lot of influence met their downfalls this year, and things really just kind of came crashing down for a lot of celebrities. And I think I've learned kind of early on through a very personal experience with someone who is a big celebrity, and I met this person and felt like, oh my gosh, like he's such an amazing person. And then things came out about him later that were just kind of devastating for me. And I realized like I really thought that this person, I thought he was someone someone who he isn't. And this is because we have to understand that what you see of celebrities and really anyone on the internet, anyone who is like a public figure, you're only seeing about 10% of who they really are. And that 10% that you're seeing is curated. It's made to give you a certain image. And so having these expectations or these really strong feelings or connections to people who you really don't know at all, I think can be really damaging. Because I remember kind of going through just like a roller coaster of emotions with that person when the things, came out about them. And I was like, I really felt like this, was a great person. And I like kind of idolized him a lot. And I think that combination of idolization and a false sense of closeness, right? Because you constantly see these people online or in whatever work that they do, their music, their movies, whatever. And so you feel this false sense of like connection to them, plus this idolization, plus a lot of times attraction as well. It creates a really dangerous combination where you then build this trust that they did not earn, right? And you have these expectations on them that also they did not earn. Yeah, I think that's been a huge lesson for us this year, is really to not idolize celebrities. And I think it will be a very good thing over the next couple years that the idolization of celebrities, of public figures in general, is gonna go down. It's gonna decline. And I think that we will start to see that we'll start to see them to be a lot more like we're a lot more alike than we are different. As well as I think just common people becoming more of like literally anyone could become famous now the way that the internet works. And so I think that not having such a huge focus or such a huge idolization of fame itself will also be a good thing. Also for Pluto in Aquarius, I think another lesson that we learned from that, like I mentioned, Pluto does represent collective power. And I think that just realizing how much power there is in collective energy, like when we do all come together for a common goal, there is so much power in that. And I think that that is something that is going to disrupt a lot of systems, and a lot of people might not like that very much. And so understanding how much power we have as a collective, as a group of people, and I mean that in whatever community that you fall into, just recognizing that there's so much power in that community itself. And I think that that is something that is probably going to be tested quite a bit. And I don't want to make this into like a predictions video, because I do want to do a separate episode on kind of my predictions for 2024. But it is something that I think we are going to have to learn to stand strong in what we believe in, and stand strong with one another in the communities that we belong to, because that power is kind of being tested right now. Now, last thing that I want to mention, at least I think there might be more that I mentioned about Pluto and Aquarius, but again, it's a huge transit. So I just think that there were so many lessons that came from that. But one of the other things is that Pluto entering Aquarius means that it is leaving Capricorn, which it has been in the sign of Capricorn for about 15 or 16 years. And this was quite a difficult transit for the cardinal signs. So if you are or have any major placements in Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a
trauma after trauma after trauma, PTSD, no therapy.
Very difficult but empowering transit. And I think that Pluto tends to do this thing where it feels like it completely rips you apart in order to build you back stronger. And the ripping apart is so difficult. I think that there was definitely a lesson, me, myself, having 2 cardinal placements in my big 3, knowing that, and I mean, I think it's something that I've always kind of had this, because understand, I'm only 31. So Pluto has been in Capricorn for like most of my life. And so just having this knowing now that there is relief, like at the end of the tunnel, there is a light, and that tough times don't last forever. That was a major lesson, I think, for me, that everything is kind of, there's going to be the ups and the downs, but everything will pass eventually. So one thing about this year is that it's simultaneously feels like it flew by. Like I really feel like it was just February a month ago, but also it was a really slow year. Like it was a pretty uneventful, slow year, at least for me. And a lot of people that I've talked to, I feel like have kind of had this same experience, that it felt like such a slow, uneventful year. And I think a big lesson that I learned about having such a slow year, I think one, it was intentional, because I know for me, one of the resolutions, or one of the things that, one of the intentions that I set at the beginning of the year was that I don't want anything that is not divinely for me. And I was very serious about that anything that was not divinely made for me, if God didn't send it, I don't want it. And I was so clear on that. And so I think that that's the reason why, for me at least, it was kind of a slow year, because there was probably a lot of things that were supposed to happen, or that could have happened, but I was so intent on, wanting what was specifically for me, that there was this kind of period of, I think, I almost want to say like weeding out. Like there was kind of a period of getting rid of all the things that were not for me. And now kind of being more in that space of being able to receive the things that are for me. So for me, that lesson definitely had a lot to do with using that slow time, using the slow periods to prepare for what is to come. And I definitely feel that energy of kind of like I was being prepared this year a lot. And, that being prepared isn't necessarily all that fun or exciting sometimes. So I definitely wanted a more eventful year. I wanted more excitement, and just to have a lot more like new experiences. And that really just wasn't what it was for me this year. But I do feel like I was being prepared. And I think that using that time, using the slow time to prepare and recharge is so key. As well as another lesson, I think, is that slow progress is still progress, that you don't need instant gratification. And this definitely goes back to kind of my major theme of discipline. But, with me being an Aries, if I want something, I want it like yesterday. And so having that understanding that just because things are moving slowly doesn't mean that it's not moving at all. And a lot of the times it's better if things move slowly. You see the progress that you really want when it moves slowly. And so, yeah, that was a huge lesson for me, seeing that slow progress, seeing the progress over time. And I think a lot of times other people can see your progress more than you can sometimes. So being able to look at things objectively and say, okay, it's moving slow, but it's moving, and instant gratification is not necessary. So kind of switching topics here. One of the biggest things that happened this year, and one of the things that I did find exciting, was the Drake and Kendrick beef. Now, for those of you who know me, actually a lot of people don't know this about me, that I kind of have a silent obsession with battle rap. I've always been really into poetry, and I think when I first discovered battle rap, I was like, oh, it's like a competitive slam poetry. Anyway, I was really excited by that beef. I think that it was the first time that I was really just keeping up with what was going on minute by minute. I'm refreshing my timeline, trying to, find out. My husband and I were every other day, oh, did you hear this? Or did you, he's sending me things, and I'm did you hear when he said this part, And so it was just a really, I know that at the end of all of that, it was a bit damaging on one side, but I say a bit damaging. It was really damaging on Drake's side, but it was really fun for me, I think, to keep up with. And for a lot of us, I think a lot of us had a lot of fun keeping up with that. But I would say that there are actually two really important lessons that we can all take away from the Drake and Kendrick beef. And number one being, don't start a war of words with a Gemini. And number two being that everything doesn't need a response. I think as that beef kind of dwindled down, and even now, I'm making this at the beginning of December, and I know that there's still some things brewing about that, surrounding that. And it's just really been showing me that everything does not require a response. So another lesson that I learned this year is to spend more time, a lot more time, with the people that you love. And this is, of course, coming from a experience with loss this year, as well as early this year and at the end of last year. I've had two people like in my family and close, but I would say there are two people who I hold very dear to me, but that I definitely don't feel like I spent a lot of time with, and without any good reason, because they're people who I could have easily made more time, like to spend more time with them. And having that regret and having that kind of understanding of like, tomorrow really is not promised. And so if you start to, and not to make it like morbid or sad, but if you start to treat the people in your life that you care about like it might be the last time you see them, right? I think we take for granted so often that like, oh, well, it's fine. I won't go visit this person. I'll just like go see them tomorrow. And we take for granted that we always assume tomorrow is going to come. So yeah, I think that was just a big lesson for me this year, is to spend a lot more time with the people that you love and be present in the moment when you're spending time with them. Another lesson that I learned this year from some of the astrological transits is, and this is coming off of, we had the eclipses in the Libra and Aries axis this year. And Libra and Aries have to do with relationships, with Aries being independent and Libra being codependent. And I think that recognizing codependency has become a huge theme this year, and definitely one of my big lessons. And so just kind of recognizing the ways that you are codependent on not just people, but things in your life, and understanding kind of the relationships, the type of codependent relationships that you build with some of the people and things in your life. And how sometimes I think that those relationships, a lot of the time it can be an unhealthy codependence, but that doesn't always mean that, right? To have a relationship where I depend on you and you depend on me does not necessarily always have to mean that it's unhealthy, but just recognizing kind of what that looks like and why we form those type of relationships. That was a big lesson. And kind of leaning into that as well, having stronger boundaries in relationships and learning to love people from a distance. That was definitely a hard lesson for me to learn this year, that when you constantly break your own boundaries, you're showing the people around you that it's okay. I would say that one of the last thing that I want to mention about the Libra Aries eclipses that happened this year is learning to self-validate rather than seek validation from external things. And this is a really hard one, I think, especially just in today's age of social media. Even if you're not necessarily a content creator, if you're online and you're posting any sort of content or engaging with people or people who are your friends on the internet, there's just this sense of validation that a lot of us have unfortunately built this dependence on with social media and likes and engagement. And so learning to self-validate again, and I say again for me because I think I've always kind of been more self-motivated and self-validated, because I'm the type of person to create things and do things because I love them and out of passion, and never share them with anyone. Like, I don't actually need anyone to see a lot of the things that I've done or created, because I did them for me. And I think getting out of that this year has been kind of an interesting balance. I think for me, on one side, learning that, well, if I'm creating certain things, like, they should be shared with other people, right? Learning to not necessarily dim my own light and share the things that I do and the things that I create with others. But at the same time, having that balance of not needing the validation from them, right? Not needing to know that it's good or that it's worth attention from other people. So that's a difficult one to balance. And I think definitely kind of a lesson that I'm carrying into 2025. Now, along with the eclipses in Libra and Aries, we also had Chiron in Aries. And Chiron is a minor planet that represents the wounded healer. And so with Chiron and Aries, I think there were huge lessons on not abandoning yourself, focusing on your healing, and not abandoning yourself and not abandoning your healing journey for others or for whatever circumstances are going on in your life. Prioritizing your healing, because you can't really pour into other people from an empty cup. And we hear this all the time, of course, but working on your own healing so that you can be a healing catalyst for others has definitely been a huge, and Chiron didn't just go into Aries this year. It's actually been in Aries for a few years now, but it's definitely been a reoccurring theme. And I feel like it kind of came to a head this year of like really focusing on, again, I think with the year feeling kind of slow, really focusing on like prioritizing your own healing and not feeling bad for doing that. I think we've had so much focus on lately on like therapy and healing, and they've just been these buzzwords that no one is really putting anything behind, right? Like there's no real substance behind that when you talk about healing and therapy. But I think that this year it's definitely become something that has more substance, and learning what does that actually mean for you? Like what does healing mean for you? And I think with Chiron and Aries, there are a lot of themes of like self-sabotaging, right? And learning not to do that. I think that we oftentimes have so little belief in ourselves, right? That we tend to self-sabotage when things are going well for us, or, you know, we have that little voice that tells us that we can't do something when we are quite literally doing that thing. And so getting out of that cycle, I think that's a lot of what Chiron and Aries has to do, is breaking the cycle of self-sabotage and focusing on our own healing. One of the other big lessons that I learned this year is that there's a big difference between staying in your comfort zone and doing what feels natural to you. And I think that the line between the two is very thin sometimes. And so we tend to stay in our comfort zone a lot of times out of fear of failure, fear of change. But when you try to push yourself out of your comfort zone, I think that there's a thin line that you have to recognize when you are forcing yourself to do something that doesn't feel natural to you and that really just doesn't even align with you, versus forcing yourself out of your comfort zone so that you can see the change that you want to see. And so doing it scared, right? Like doing something even though you're scared, even though you're not sure if it's going to work out and it's not all that comfortable for you, versus doing something that just feels completely unaligned with who you are and unnatural to you. And it can be kind of hard to recognize the two of those things. And I think it really comes down to realizing why you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, why you're doing something that, you know, may not be what you're used to. And it's okay if it doesn't feel completely natural, but recognizing like, are you being authentic in this moment? And I think that's kind of what it really comes down to, is authenticity. You can be uncomfortable and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone while still being authentic. And so another lesson, kind of bridging off of that, is that no step is too small to take. Take the first step, just do it. Just even if you just do one small thing towards whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, no step is too small, right? You will have started at the very least and gotten yourself even just a little bit closer to what it is that you're trying to do. And I think a lot of times I definitely feel like, well, if I can't do the whole thing, right? Like if I can't do it to its maximum and complete the entire process, then I don't want to do it. I don't want to just start on this thing and just do this one step. I want to, I a lot of times feel like I try to get to the end before I even start. And I know a lot of us do that, but recognizing that, hey, it's okay. Sometimes you don't have 100% to give, right? To get all the way to the end of something. So, you know, or to get all the way to the end of the project the first time, or to get it right the first time. And that's okay, right? If you just take the first step, if you do what you can do in that moment, you'll be happy that you did, even if it's just a small thing that you do. And I think with that, knowing this was definitely one of the harder lessons for me to learn this year. And it's one that I definitely saw reflected in other people around me, other people online, that it is okay to start over and fail and start over again. It is absolutely okay to do that. You don't have to get everything right on the first try. You don't have to have all of the answers all of the time. It's okay to learn in that process. Stopping when you realize that you're not getting the results that you want, or that you're not getting right. I don't necessarily want to say not getting the results that you want, but realizing that you're not quite on the path that you want to be on, and saying, okay, we're going to stop, we're going to scrap this, and we're going to start all over. that is okay. You don't have to look at yourself like a quitter or a failure for doing that. And having that opportunity to do that, I think anytime that you can comfortably or safely just scrap something and start over, that is actually such a luxury. That is such a privilege to be able to do that. So I really think, honestly, it's something you should take advantage of if you can, and don't look at yourself as having, been a quitter or a failure just because you decide to start over. And, and this goes into another lesson that I learned this year, which is that it's better to do it right than it is to do it quickly. So, if you realize that you have to start over in order to do it right, that's okay. Yeah, you might be a little bit behind. You might be a little bit behind schedule. You might be a little bit behind, whoever it is that you're trying to keep up with. And that's okay. You don't have to be on track with everyone else, because you're not just trying to get to the end and just get there, right? You want to get there the right way. So I think that's important. Now, another important lesson that comes from one of the transits this year is that we had Saturn in Pisces this year, and it's been in Pisces as well. Like, it was in Pisces last year, but there were definitely just a lot of important transits this year that kind of activated Saturn in Pisces. And so Saturn is the planet that has to do with boundaries and limitations and discipline. And Pisces is the energy of imagination, faith, spirituality, and belief. And so I definitely think that one of the big lessons from Saturn and Pisces for the past year that it's been in that sign, as well as a major theme this year, is that faith without works really is dead. And I know that's a common phrase a lot of people like to throw around, but I think really understanding it this year for me meant realizing that doing the work is also an act of faith. And so it doesn't diminish your belief in yourself or your belief in a higher power. It doesn't diminish your faith necessarily to do the work as well. I think that there's an important time when you have to realize that you have to just kind of let it be, right? You cannot control everything, and you just have to let things be what they're supposed to be. But it doesn't take away from the faith that you have or your belief that something is going to work out for you if you actually do the work as well. And so I think that kind of goes back into what I mentioned about feeling like I'm like cheating if I do something the easy way. I think this was something for me that it's like, well, I feel like I'm lacking faith or I'm lacking belief because I'm also trying to like make it happen myself. I'm also, thinking, well, what can I do to do this? Or, it's like, yeah, I've prayed on it and I've, meditated on it and all of the things and put the energetic work into it, right? Which is definitely what Pisces, what Saturn in Pisces is about, but also doing the work that goes along with that does not mean that you don't believe in it, that you don't believe it's going to happen. So, and I think that it even shows more faith, because to work on something, to be physically working on something that may not even seem possible for you, right? To be physically working on something that doesn't even feel like it's anywhere near your reach takes a lot of belief, in yourself. And so doing the work is an act of belief as well. Now, another big transit that happened earlier this year is that Jupiter went into Gemini, and this happens once every 12 years. So that's why I say it's kind of a big transit. And Jupiter is a planet that expands and brings opportunity and growth. And Gemini is about communication and information. And so I think one of the big lessons that came from that is just to stay curious. It's such a simple lesson. And I think that Jupiter kind of gives us the simplicities, like everything doesn't always have to be so complex and abstract. And especially with Jupiter being in the sign of Gemini, it really just had more to do, I feel like, with staying curious, staying open-minded, and recognizing that you don't know everything and being willing to learn more, being willing to take in more information. A little bit along the same lines, we had Mercury retrograde. So we have 3 Mercury retrogrades, about 3 every year. And earlier this year, we had Mercury retrograde in Virgo. And that was one that I feel like came with a lot of interesting lessons. The big lesson that I carried with me from Mercury retrograde in Virgo was to not be so hard on yourself, right? So when Mercury goes retrograde, it's all about relearning and rethinking and reviewing things. And Virgo energy is something that I am really working on being comfortable with and really working on not being so biased towards, because it is this energy of not just practicality. I like that element of Virgo, but it's also an energy of perfection. It's an energy of constant improvement and of being very detailed and very particular. And I think I've always kind of looked at that as a negative thing, because to me, it seems like, well, nothing's ever good enough. Everything always has to be perfect. There's always something to like pick at, right? And try to improve on, when like just be happy with the result that you have, just be happy with what it is. But I think that Mercury retrograde in Virgo kind of helped me to look at that from the other side of that lens, and realizing that yes, we do constantly want improvement, right? And there is always something that we can always look at, what we can improve on. And I think it's good to have that mentality, but to not be so hard on yourself and realize that you don't have to be perfect. I think especially to stop comparing yourself to what you think is perfect. And that's been a huge lesson for me over the past few years, and one that I think I've had to learn the hard way, because a lot of the time what we are comparing ourselves to or looking at and, thinking of as something that we, want to achieve, or looking at someone else and their situation and thinking that like, oh, I, wish I had that. You truly don't know what else goes on with that person. You don't know that situation a lot of the times isn't even exactly what it looks like. You don't know what it took for them to get the things that they have. You don't know what else to deal with in addition to that. And I think along those lines, understanding that you are one of one. You are actually perfect the way that you are. And that sounds so corny, I know. But what you've been through and your experiences in life are what make you who you are. And one phrase that I heard this year that I really love is that no one can copy your soul, no one can copy your energy, no one can copy your spirit. And so even if it seems like, so many things that feel like they're kind of oversaturated, and you're thinking to yourself like, well, what's special about me? Your soul, your energy, your spirit are the things that cannot be copied. And that's going to be even more and more important, I think, as we go into the future and the changes that are coming, to know that that is the part of it that makes it uniquely yours. Coming to the end of this list, there have been a lot of Leo themes this year. So like I mentioned, Pluto in Aquarius was opposing Leo, and the themes of, fame and idolization and authority, putting people up on a pedestal has been huge. We had a Mercury retrograde and a Mars retrograde in Leo this year, which we're actually having a Mars retrograde coming up, the end of the year leading us into next year. And so I think aside from all of the lessons having to do with not idolizing people and fame, Leo is also an energy that is extremely creative, and creative from like the soul, right? Creative from what really drives you and your passion. And I think that it's been a really good lesson, and it's going to be, I hope, going into 2025, a lesson on reconnecting with what you're passionate about. I know that felt like a huge theme with Mercury retrograde in Virgo and Leo, that, prioritize the things that you are passionate about. Put energy into those things that you really care about, and especially reconnecting with your inner child, right? Not always having to create things because it's going to make you money, or because it's what people expect, or because you want, everyone to say, wow, congratulations, you did a great job. But creating things because it's just what's in you and you have to get it out. Recognizing that it's not unproductive for you to do those things, right? Connecting with your inner child and creating from that space and engaging in play, right? Play and creativity are not unproductive. The last lesson that I want to mention that I learned this year, and I think probably the second biggest lesson, probably the most important one as we wrap up the end of the year, and this is the end of November for some context. It's okay to have high hopes. It's okay to have high expectations and to hope for the very best, even if that feels somewhat impossible. And especially when it feels very possible, when it feels probable and likely. It's okay to want those things, and it's okay if it doesn't happen. It is okay to be let down, to have the high expectations and the high hopes, and for things to not go exactly as you planned or as you expected. Having that enthusiasm and that excitement and that hope for, what you really want, and it not necessarily turning out that way can be soul crushing, and it can be really, devastating. Having the courage to try in the first place, having the courage to even reach that high, that took a lot, right? That is so important, to even just have that courage to try. Don't beat yourself down when things don't go as you predicted. Don't beat yourself down when you're disappointed by the outcome. It's most important to honor how far you came, honor the courage that you had to try, honor the courage that you had to reach that high, and above all else, have the courage to reach that high again. Don't let disappointment be your defeat. Don't let that feeling be the thing that stops you from ever trying again. Don't let that disappointment be the thing that takes away your hope, that takes away your vision for your future. And so with that said, we are wrapping up this year, and I just want to say that I am absolutely grateful and just in awe of everything that has happened this year. There have been good things, there have been bad things. So many lessons learned. And I think in making this list, it definitely helped me have some perspective on even the bad things that happened this year, that there were lessons in those things. And so I am glad to be here at the end of this year, and I'm glad that you're here at the end of the year with me. So I want this to be a conversation. Tell me how you feel about some of the things that I mentioned, some of my lessons. Are they things that you share, that you learned as well? And what is the biggest thing that you learned this year, right? Or what is the most important or most shocking thing that you learned from this year? And if you enjoyed this episode, then please be sure to subscribe, follow, and leave us a review, because it helps other people like you find the show. And if you want to connect with me more, I do post daily updates over on Instagram at the Astro Lotus. And I do also have an amazing community of Patreon members, our cosmic cousins. So definitely join if you're interested in that. And until next time, take care and keep on shining.